I will not be silent while you pervert justice in this courtroom. You're biased, corrupt, and unfit to hold that gavel.
There are days in a courtroom when the air shifts. Before anything even happens, you can feel it in the way the bailiff stands a little straighter, in the way the gallery fills up faster than usual, in the whispered exchanges between people who sense something is coming but can't quite name what it is yet. Tuesday afternoon at Providence Municipal Court was one of those days. The benches were packed tighter than normal. Local reporters had positioned themselves along the back wall. Court staff exchanged glances that said more than words could. And the reason it was about to matter had almost nothing to do with the person who walked in 45 minutes late. Almost nothing. Because the person who walked in 45 minutes late turned out to be the entire story. I am Frederick and I cover courtroom moments that deserve more than a headline. Today I'm walking you through one of those cases that stays with you long after the gavel falls. Not because it's dramatic for the sake of drama, but because it shows you something real about how people behave when they believe the rules don't apply to them. Stick with me on this one. If this story is already pulling you in, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It's a small thing that genuinely helps the channel keep going. The case file sitting on the judge's bench that afternoon belonged to Madison Eleanor Hartley, 24 years old, daughter of Congressman Robert Hartley. Before the session even began, the bailiff, a 30-year veteran named Marcus Chen, had leaned over quietly and mentioned that the congressman's office had already called twice that morning requesting special consideration for the case. The judge closed the folder he was reviewing. His jaw tightened slightly. He looked up at Marcus and said simply that the law doesn't take phone calls. Then he waited. What the judge was waiting for arrived through the courtroom doors with enough force to turn every head in the room. Madison walked in like she had arrived at a venue that owed her something. The Chanel bag hanging from her wrist, the red-bottom Louboutin heels clicking against the tile floor with a rhythm that seemed almost intentional. Diamond studs catching the fluorescent light overhead. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, her nails freshly manicured. Everything about her appearance was deliberate, expensive, and designed to communicate exactly one message to everyone watching. I am not like the people who usually sit in this chair. But it wasn't the outfit that made the room tense. It was the phone pressed to her ear. And the laughter. She was laughing as she walked down the centre aisle of an active courtroom, carrying on a conversation like she was strolling through a shopping district. She told the person on the other end she couldn't believe they'd actually made her come down here. Said it was so ridiculous. Said it wouldn't take long. A security officer near the entrance stepped forward and politely asked her to silence her phone. She looked at him the way you'd look at a fly that landed on your sleeve. Turned her shoulder away. Kept talking. She mentioned to whoever Ashley was that some guy was trying to tell her what to do. Then she laughed again. I've been following courtroom stories long enough to know the difference between someone who's nervous and acts out and someone who genuinely does not believe the room applies to them. Nervousness looks a certain way. It's fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, speaking too fast or too quietly. What Madison was doing was something else entirely. This was comfort. This was someone who had moved through every room of her life with the unquestioned certainty that the room would accommodate her. She finally ended a call somewhere near the defendant's podium, but didn't put the phone away. Just switched to scrolling, thumb moving across the screen, that same small smile still on her face. The judge addressed her by name. She glanced up for half a second, said, "Yeah, hi, can we make this quick?" She had plans this afternoon. The gallery reacted the way most people would. Quiet gasps, slow head shakes. An elderly woman in the third row pressed her lips together. A man in a worn work jacket leaned toward his neighbour and said something under his breath that made both of them frown. The judge asked Madison again, clearly and professionally, to put the phone away and give the court her full attention. She held the phone up slightly, as though displaying it explained the situation. Said she was handling important things, business stuff. Said her family had actual responsibilities. When the phone was finally, reluctantly, shoved into her designer bag with a dramatic exhale, she looked at the judge for the first time and said something that dropped the temperature in the room by several degrees. She said they both knew how this was going to end, that her father's office had already handled everything, That one line explained the entire architecture of how she had moved through her 24 years. The world was a series of problems. Problems had prices. Prices got paid by someone with the right last name. End of story. Except it wasn't. The judge moved through the charges without rushing, driving under the influence with a blood alcohol content of 0.12, well above the legal limit, travelling 85 miles per hour through a 35 mile per hour residential zone at nearly midnight, running a red light at a busy intersection, sideswiping a parked vehicle and causing significant damage, leaving the scene without stopping, continuing to drive for 6 more blocks before being pulled over, refusing to immediately comply with Officer Patterson's instructions and initially refusing the breathalyzer. The officer's report noted slurred speech, the smell of alcohol, and argumentative behaviour from the first moment of contact. Madison interrupted before he could finish. She said the car had been basically in the middle of the road, that whoever parked it there was the real problem. Then she explained she hadn't been drunk, that she'd had a few glasses of wine at a charity gala. She used the words charity gala twice, carefully, as if they carried legal weight. Then came the line about the breathalyzer. She told the court she wasn't going to stand on the side of the road blowing into a plastic tube like a common criminal. She'd been at an important event. She'd been wearing a $3,000 dress. Common criminal. She used that phrase without any apparent awareness of what it revealed. It suggested there was a category of person for whom rules existed and a separate category that she belonged to, one that sat above inconvenience and consequence. I find myself thinking about that phrase more than almost anything else that was said that day. Not with anger exactly, more with a kind of sadness about where it comes from. That belief doesn't grow on its own. Someone over many years helped plant it there. Before the charges could be addressed further, Catherine Hartley rose from the gallery, Madison's mother. She was impeccably dressed, composed, clearly comfortable in rooms where status mattered. She addressed the judge and mentioned the family's charitable contributions to the city, the Police Benevolent Fund, the courthouse renovation project, community programs. She framed it gently, carefully, but the meaning underneath was plain enough. Investments had been made. Relationships existed. This matter should resolve quietly, without the spectacle of a formal hearing. Her daughter had made a mistake, she said. She was young. She was learning. The judge thanked her for the information and made clear that donations do not purchase different treatment under the law. He said her daughter faced serious charges that would be addressed through the proper legal process, the same as anyone else who sat in that chair. What Madison did next told you more about her than anything she'd said so far. She smirked, not with embarrassment or discomfort, but with a kind of cool amusement, as if watching her mother fail had been mildly entertaining. Then she said quietly, but loud enough to carry, that she told her mum this would be a waste of time, that this judge actually thought he was important, and then the part that made the bailiff take a half step forward. She said he was nobody, that the whole court was nothing. The judge rose from his seat. When he stood, the entire room felt it. He told her she was in a court of law, that she would show respect for the proceedings and for the people her actions had harmed. And he asked her if he was making himself clear. Madison stared back at him and lifted her chin, said crystal clear, said, "Can they move this along?" because she had actual important things to do. The judge sat back down, looked at her steadily and said they were going to move along, just not in the direction she was expecting. Then he asked the bailiff to bring in Maria Santos. The courtroom doors opened quietly. What does a gallery do when someone walks in and everything about them is the opposite of the person who came before? I'll tell you what they did. They went completely still, because Maria Santos walked in with a dignity that didn't announce itself. She was in her early 40s, clean but worn hospital scrubs, an ID badge still clipped to her chest from what had clearly been a long shift. The exhaustion on her face wasn't from one bad night. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying too much for too long and has learnt to carry it quietly. She held a manila folder tight against her chest. Her steps were measured. She looked like someone who knew she had every right to be in that room, but wasn't entirely sure the room would treat her that way. I want to pause here for a moment because this is the part that gets me every single time I sit with stories like this one. Maria Santos didn't have a lawyer in a tailored suit. She didn't have a congressman's name. She had a folder, and the nerve to show up and tell the truth. That counts for something. That counts for a lot. Madison didn't look at her. She pulled her phone back out and started scrolling again. The judge asked her a second time to put it away. The bag opened and closed with theatrical annoyance. Maria took the witness chair, folded her hands in her lap, and began. Her voice was soft, but it was clear. Slightly accented, beautiful English. The kind of careful speech that comes from someone who learnt the language with intention. She described the night of October 15th. She'd been home with her 3 children. Her youngest, 8 years old and asthmatic, was having trouble sleeping, and she'd been sitting with him when she heard the crash. Metal tearing against metal. She ran to the window and saw her car with its rear end destroyed, and watched a black SUV continue down the street without even slowing. She'd run outside in her slippers. Neighbours came. Glass was scattered across the pavement. The bumper was hanging off. The taillight was completely shattered. And she said the only thing she could think about, standing there on the sidewalk in the dark, was how she was going to get to work the next morning. How she was going to take her son to his doctor. How she was going to drive her daughter to school. The judge asked her to explain what the car had meant to her family. She looked down at her hands before answering. The car was 15 years old, she said. Not fancy, not pretty, but it ran perfectly. She'd bought it 3 years ago with money she'd saved by working double shifts at the hospital during the day and cleaning offices downtown at night. Every extra dollar she made went into a jar on her kitchen counter until she had enough to buy it outright. No payments, no debt. It was hers. Her children loved it, she said. Not because it was special, but because it was how their mother picked them up from school, how they got to church on Sundays together. And when her son couldn't breathe in the middle of the night, it was how she got into the emergency room in 10 minutes instead of waiting for an ambulance they couldn't afford. That image, a jar on a kitchen counter, double shifts, an 8-year-old who couldn't breathe. I don't have a clever observation to make about that. I just think it deserves to be heard without commentary layered over it. After the accident, the insurance company told her she had been partially at fault for how the car was parked, which she said was in the same spot she parked every single night in front of her own building. They offered her $1,200 on a car worth $4,500. She turned down the offer because it wasn't enough to replace what she'd lost, and in doing so, lost any immediate payout. Without the car, she couldn't reach her night cleaning job. She lost 2 weeks of income. She was now taking 3 buses to get to the hospital for her day shifts. She left her building at 4:30 in the morning and didn't return until 8 at night. Her 12-year-old daughter had been walking to school alone in the dark. The girl had gotten detention twice for arriving late. Her son had missed 2 appointments with his lung specialist because the clinic was on the other side of the city, and without a car, it was simply out of reach. Her youngest, her 6-year-old, had asked her last week why they were poor now. Not sad, not missing the car, poor. That was the word her 6-year-old used. Drop a comment below and tell me what's going through your mind right now. I want to know what people are actually feeling at this point in the story because I think it matters. The gallery was not making a sound. Then Madison opened her wallet. She counted through a thick stack of $100 bills with her manicured nails, flipping them quickly, then threw the entire stack onto the podium. Some bills slid to the floor. She told Maria to take the money and stop with the dramatic sob story. Called it a car accident, said these things happen, told her to buy a new car and move on with her life. The sound that went through that courtroom was something between a gasp and a collective wound. People stood up. A woman near the front shouted. An elderly man yelled, "Shame!" The bailiff moved forward, calling for order. And Maria Santos, who had come in quietly and told her story without bitterness or theatre, looked at the scattered money on the floor and covered her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook. The judge rose. He told Madison to pick up the money. She refused, said she was trying to solve the problem, said if Maria was too proud to take it, that wasn't her problem. The judge told her she wasn't solving anything, that she was attempting to erase accountability with cash, that she was disrespecting Maria, the court, and every principle the room was built on. He gave her what he called one final opportunity to show respect. One chance to act like a person who understood the gravity of where she was and what she had done. Madison crossed her arms. Her voice rose. She called the proceedings a circus. She pointed at Maria and said something ugly about her using her circumstances to play the victim. She said she didn't owe her anything. She said she didn't owe the judge anything. Then she invoked her father's name again, louder and with more force this time, and said he was going to have the judge's job, that he would make sure the judge never worked again, that the judge was nobody in a pathetic little courtroom pretending to have power while her family had real power and real money and real influence. And then she said what she said. The words hit the walls and came back. There's no tasteful way to describe the language, so I won't try to reproduce it here. What I'll say is that it left no ambiguity about what she thought of the court, of Maria, and of anyone who had the nerve to make her answer for her choices. She grabbed her bag and turned for the door. The bailiff didn't move. She bounced off him and stumbled on her heels. The officers came from the side of the room, calm and professional. One took her arm gently, but without any give in it. She tried to pull back, said don't touch her, said they knew who she was, said her father would have their badges. The second officer produced handcuffs. They closed with a single, clean click. That sound, that ordinary, mechanical sound. There was nothing dramatic about it except everything it meant in that specific moment, in that specific room, closing around the wrist of someone who had spent the entire morning operating under the belief that sounds like that were for other people. Madison was sobbing now, the makeup running. The designer outfit no longer carrying its earlier message. She was begging. Said she couldn't go to jail. Said she had things to do. Said people were expecting her. Called for her mother. The door to the holding area opened and her voice continued down the corridor for a few seconds and then went quiet. Her mother stood in the gallery, pale, hands moving uselessly at her sides. The judge took a long breath and sat back down. He told the room that what they'd just witnessed was not justice, not yet. That was consequence, arriving at the door of someone who had never expected to answer it. Justice, he said, was what came next. He was thorough and precise with the sentencing. 60 days in county jail for contempt of court, beginning immediately, non-negotiable. An 18-month suspension of her driver's licence. 200 hours of community service at St Mary's Hospital where she would see with her own eyes what drunk driving does to human bodies. Mandatory alcohol education and treatment. A $5,000 fine to the state. 1 year of probation following her release, with any violation of law resulting in additional time. Attendance and completion of a victim impact program where she would hear from families whose lives had been changed permanently by drivers who made the same choice she made. And then the restitution. Full replacement value of the vehicle, $4,500, $3,000 for lost wages, transportation costs, and the emotional harm caused to Maria and her 3 children. Total of $7,500 to be paid within 30 days of release, or the contempt sentence would extend by an additional 30 days. Maria's hands flew to her mouth. The tears came differently this time. Not the tears of someone absorbing more grief. The tears of someone who had been told by a person in power that she was worth something, that what happened to her mattered, that the jar on her kitchen counter and the double shifts and the slippers on the sidewalk at midnight were not invisible. A woman sitting behind her reached forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. The judge then addressed something that had been hanging in the room all morning, the phone calls from the congressman's office. He spoke to it directly, publicly, aware that the proceeding was documented and that his words would travel further than that room. He said Congressman Hartley held an important position, had influence and power within his sphere, but that sphere ended at the courtroom door. That no office made decisions about how the law was applied in that room. That if any attempt was made to interfere with the judicial process, the matter would be referred to appropriate authorities for investigation into political interference with the courts. That kind of statement is rarer than it should be. When it happens clearly and without hedging, it's worth paying attention to. He closed with something about Madison herself. He said she was 24 years old, young enough that none of this had to define the rest of her life. That 60 days in a cell with no phone and no credit cards and no one to call was time. Time to sit with what she'd done. Time to ask herself what kind of person she wanted to be after the door opened again. He said privilege was not protection from consequences. It never had been. And more than that, he said, it was never supposed to be protection. It was